The Walking Dead has some of the most complex and compelling characters in all of television. Now naturally, throughout the 11 seasons of the show, we see some truly beautiful and intriguing dynamics between these characters, and that's exactly what I wanted to focus on in today's video. So join me as I highlight some of my favourite relationships within one of the greatest TV shows ever made, and then give a definitive answer to who I believe is the best character dynamic in the whole show. Now, quite obviously, this video is very subjective, so I would also love to hear who some of your favourite dynamics are in the comments below. But with that being said, grab some popcorn and let's get into some of the best character dynamics in The Walking Dead. Now, I'm sure this first selection comes as no real surprise to absolutely anybody. Maggie and Glenn's relationship serves as the emotional core of the show for the 5 seasons it appears in. And in the incredibly bleak and brutal world that these two inhabit, their love served as a rare source of hope and normality. And after Glenn's death, the show sees a shift in tone, and that largely is down to not just the character of Glenn dying, but what this very relationship represented. Maggie and Glenn's on-screen romance is incredibly well done. For a show that is largely focused on the story of Rick Grimes and the end of the world, to be able to make these side characters shine and blossom is a testament to the writing in the early seasons of the show. Unlike many TV relationships, Glenn and Maggie's romance is developed gradually and realistically, making it not just feel incredibly natural, but also upping the stakes for their characters individually. This very relationship causes you to care about them both immensely, which just amplifies the fear of one of them dying in any tense scene. Their relationship is one built off joint trauma and finding hope in a broken world, and it helps to break up and ease the constant death and loss we constantly witness throughout the show. I also love how there's this almost comedic value in the early days of their relationship, when we see Glenn going out on runs with Maggie at the farm, and it just helps to break up the show, giving us a break from the death and violence to something a little bit more light-hearted. And as their relationship progresses, they start to embody the very themes of the series, that being hope, loss, and humanity. And Steven Yeun and Lauren Cohan absolutely kill their respective roles, as they are a huge part of what made the show so special in the earlier seasons. And this very character dynamic is arguably the most famous within the entire show as well, as I still see TikTok edits about these two with hundreds of thousands of likes. So for arguably being the most iconic dynamic in the show, as well as one of the most wholesome, Maggie and Glenn have to make this list. The dynamic of Hershel and Rick is one of my favourites in the entire show, as we watch Hershel go from wanting Rick and co off his land to becoming part of the family and acting in many ways as a father figure within Rick's life. And when the two first meet, Rick is a pragmatic ex-sheriff trying to protect his group, whilst Hershel is a man of faith, clinging to an ever-fading hope. But despite their differences, both men are excellent leaders, just trying to protect their families no matter the cost, and it's a relationship that evolves from mistrust to mutual respect. And although at first the two have very different ideologies, they share some very key values. Those being they are both devoted fathers who try and keep humanity even in this chaotic world. And Hershel is absolutely vital in Rick's character development. Not only does he help Rick evolve from a survivor to a leader, but he also helps to keep him grounded, in many ways serving as his emotional anchor. Hershel leads with kindness and example, and he shows Rick that strength doesn't always have to mean cruelty. Hershel's presence in the show is phenomenal, but when you pair him with arguably the greatest character in fiction, what you get is a true work of art. And it's not just a one-way dynamic either, which is why it's so effective. Hershel grounds Rick and shows him how to lead whilst keeping his humanity, and Rick shows Hershel the reality of the apocalypse, but also opens his eyes to the good still within people. The two evolved together, and Hershel was a huge part of Rick's life. Even during Rick's most vulnerable moments, Hershel was always there to guide him back. And it's this very influence that encourages Rick to strike a balance between strength and mercy. And Hershel's eventual death at the hands of the governor marks a profound turning point in the narrative and in Rick's character development. His execution is both symbolic and an emotional blow for not just the viewers, but also for Rick. And for a while, it turns Rick into a cold-hearted killer. However, he comes full circle, which is evident by Rick's hallucinations of Hershel all the way in Season 9, some 3 years after his death. And although these two may have only known each other just over a year, the impact they have on each other is so profound that this character dynamic has to make this list. The late Scott Wilson is a standout in every scene he appears in, and of course Andrew Lincoln is phenomenal as always. Rick and Hershel's dynamic is one that evolves from ideological opposition to deep mutual respect and mentorship, and their very bond becomes one of the moral cornerstones of the series. And in a world where survival often comes at the cost of humanity, Rick and Hershel's relationship reminds viewers that it doesn't always need to be that way. So for all of those reasons, and the fact that the whole show is largely built on the foundations of this very character dynamic, for me solidifies it as one of the best. Again, another rather predictable dynamic, but you can't really not include it on this list. The story of Carol and Daryl, unlike the other two so far, is one that lives on and is still ongoing. And it's just altogether an incredibly heartwarming story of two people who found themselves within the apocalypse. This relationship really starts to blossom during Season 2, as Daryl, a seemingly outcast lone wolf, starts to show us all a different side to him as he searches tirelessly for Carol's lost daughter Sophia. And from here, the two of them just go from strength to strength. I also think the fact that the relationship is completely platonic just adds to its effectiveness. The show doesn't rely on pairing up two fan favourites and having them fall madly in love. Instead, it takes two very broken individuals and slowly pieces them back together. It's a slow burning, heartwarming story of two totally platonic soulmates. Daryl was the first to truly believe in Carol's ability to survive and evolve, and Carol offered Daryl the trust and emotional support that he'd never received, even from his own family. What also makes their dynamic so incredibly effective is how their individual growth parallels and supports the other. Carol transforms from a background character into a capable and ruthless survivor, and Daryl evolves from a loner into a loyal and integral part of our group's success. Their bond acts as both a mirror and a compass, each reflecting the other's strengths and helping each other to find direction. The Daryl and Carol we see in Season 11 are light years away from their counterparts in Season 1, and I mean that in the best possible way. It's two characters that flat out don't exist in Daryl's case, or play a little role in the comics in Carol's case, that are such gargantuan parts of the TV show's success. Never in a million years, all the way back in 2010, did I think the two survivors I'd be seeing week in and out, 11 seasons later, would be the abused housewife and the redneck loner. But lo and behold, they are. And it's a dynamic that just works incredibly well. It's an unexpected friendship built over 12 years on our screens that we have all watched blossom. And it exemplifies how human connection can be forged through mutual pain and respect, how trust and loyalty can grow even in the darkest circumstances, and how love can exist even in a world like this. It's the definition of true companionship, and Carol and Daryl will forever be iconic. Norman Reedus and Melissa McBride's chemistry on screen is as good as it gets, and I'm so glad that the writers chose to keep these two characters alive until the end. Okay, when I said Rick and Hershel's relationship are the foundations of the show, maybe I more accurately meant the scaffolding, because Carl and Rick's relationship is the actual concrete base of the entire series. I mean, it's the dynamic that not only drives the narrative forward, but also controls every single one of Rick Grimes' decisions for the first 8 seasons. It's a beautiful story of unwavering fatherly love that ultimately ends in tragedy, thanks to a certain writer. If you couldn't tell, I'm still incredibly salty about Carl's death. But anyway, At the emotional core of The Walking Dead lies the relationship of Rick and Carl. Rick's very first thought waking up in Grady Memorial Hospital that day was his family, and that reunion scene in season 1 is enough to make anybody cry, I don't care what you say. Rick would do just about anything to protect his son. I mean, we even see him bite another man's throat out in order to do so. But I love how Rick starts the series out as a hopeful, principled man, committed to upholding order and law in a chaotic world, as Carl begins as a naive, innocent child, and as the story progresses, both undergo radical changes. Carl is forced to grow up extremely quickly, exposed to violence, death, and hard choices, at an age where most children are still learning who they are. Rick, in turn, is shaped by his responsibilities as a father. His journey is marked by a constant balancing act between becoming a ruthless protector his world demands and staying as a role model for Carl. In many ways, Rick is trying to preserve Carl's humanity whilst not losing his own. And this is the key theme of the show. At its very core, it's an incredibly moving family story about a man trying to keep his son safe. It's a very realistic and well-layered relationship that has its ups and downs, just like any father and son dynamic would. From Carl not thinking his father's cut out for this new world, to him being the reason he spares Negan's life. The Walking Dead is their story, and when Carl dies and Rick leaves the show, there is a massive void, and in my opinion the show instantly becomes less engaging. For nearly a decade we followed Rick and Carl through unimaginable trauma, growth and triumph. And they weren't just characters, they were the very heart of the show, and losing them felt like losing the soul of the story. It's an organic, believable dynamic that drives the narrative forward, and also gives us some of the best moments in the entire series. Whether it's Rick biting out Joe's throat or the tension at the lineup, we were in constant anticipation of how the father and son duo would squeeze out of their increasingly impossible scenarios. That is, until one day one of them just didn't. Rest in peace, Carl. I love the change we see them both undergo, as we watch not just Carl, but also Rick grow up in the apocalypse. And it's that change which is so interesting. Rick starts off lecturing his son about humanity as Carl becomes increasingly desensitized to this world. However, years later, it's actually Carl who acts as Rick's moral compass. Carl pushes Rick to think beyond survival. This reversal, where the son begins to guide the father, this adds depth to their relationship and highlights the unique pressures of growing up in a world where children often mature faster than adults. The Walking Dead at its core is a story about these two very characters, and every decision Rick makes is for Carl, and in my opinion it's such a shame that this father and son duo had a premature ending to it. But Carl and Rick's relationship will forever be one of the most layered and raw depictions of family love ever seen on our TV screens. Rick and Daryl. Another one of the most iconic dynamics within the show. Rick and Daryl share a relationship that's closer to a brotherhood than it is a friendship, and the two come from very different worlds. Rick is a former sheriff whilst Daryl is a hot-headed outsider, but rather than clash endlessly, they slowly begin to earn each other's trust, learning that their differences are strengths when combined. I mean, these two are a walker's worst nightmare. They are so formidable when working together. One of the most powerful aspects of Rick and Daryl's friendship is how much they say without saying anything at all. They are not overly emotional or talkative, but their loyalty to each other is undeniable. And these two have been through so much together that they would die for each other. In a world where people die, turn on each other, or lose their humanity, Rick and Daryl's friendship is a rare constant. It becomes a symbol of what's still worth fighting for, not just survival, but connection, trust, and family. Their relationship shows that even in a world gone mad, people can still find others to believe in, and that brotherhood can be just as powerful as blood ties. Again, much like Daryl and Carol, who could have predicted, if you were watching season 1 for the first time, that these two would become such close friends? Unlike many TV friendships that start with instant chemistry, Rick and Daryl's is very different. It's a relationship that evolves gradually and realistically. They start out wary of each other, but as Rick and Shane's friendship starts to deteriorate, Rick starts relying more and more on Daryl, and he never lets Rick down. It's an incredibly heartwarming dynamic that is one of the few feel-good factors in this rather bleak TV show. And the fact Daryl is still searching for Rick to this day probably cements him as the greatest friend this planet has ever seen. I just get this overly warm feeling when I watch Daryl and Rick on screen together. From Rick telling Daryl he's his brother in season 4 to their reunion after Daryl escapes the sanctuary in season 7. These two have been through hell and back, but they've done it together. And as the show evolved and other core characters died or left, Rick and Daryl's relationship provided a sense of stability. And again, the writers have knocked this one out of the park. They even show us the two of them fighting, making the dynamic feel incredibly real. This is what set The Walking Dead apart. Every character was written so well in the early seasons, and these two are a testament to that statement. This, in my opinion, is the greatest depiction of friendship and loyalty I've ever seen in a TV show, and I love every single scene that these two are a part of. And once again, the chemistry between Andrew Lincoln and Norman Reedus is absolutely phenomenal, and I just think this is such an amazing dynamic. So, we've gone through some of the best character dynamics within The Walking Dead, but before I give my definitive answer to what I believe is the greatest dynamic, I'd like to give a couple of honourable mentions. Rick and Morgan's relationship is amazing, as is Rick and Michonne's. Daryl and Beth is an unexpected duo that I wish we'd seen spend more time together, and I really enjoy the lightheartedness of Michonne and Carl's relationship. Daryl and Merle's is a complex and intriguing dive into their brotherhood. And finally, Negan and Rick's, as well as Negan and Judith's relationships, I also think are phenomenal. Any one of these could have made the list, but I didn't want to make this video an hour long. But with that being said, the best character dynamic within The Walking Dead, in my opinion, is Rick and Shane. Look, I very nearly put Rick and Carl here, and although they may be the most important character dynamic in the show, in my opinion, Rick and Shane's is the best, because it perfectly encapsulates and embodies the themes of this show. Morality versus survival, law versus chaos, old world versus new. Their relationship is intense, layered, and incredibly tragic. Rick and Shane start out as best friends, former policemen who trust each other with their lives. However, we watch as this once brotherhood erodes into a fatal feud, where Shane feels like he has to kill Rick. It's both heartbreaking and captivating, as these two men fight tooth and nail over Laurie and Carl. And Shane is the first glimpse we get into how this world has changed people. It's a story older than time, a traditional love triangle, but this time it's set in an apocalypse. The romantic tension between Rick, Shane and Laurie isn't just soap opera drama, it's a core source of emotional tension that raises the stakes tenfold. Shane loved Laurie and believed Rick was dead, and when Rick returns alive, everything Shane had built is gone in an instant. What makes it even better is Shane isn't your typical villain. He kills Otis, but to save Carl. He storms the barn, but to protect the group. He saves Laurie and Carl because he believes Rick is dead. In fact, he tries to save him himself. It's so much more than just your typical best friend turned enemies. It's like an onion. There are so many layers to this dynamic. Rick becomes harder, more ruthless in part because of Shane, and Shane pushes Rick to grow, to stop hesitating and to recognise that the world has changed, whilst at the same time Rick's presence reminds Shane of what he's lost, driving him further into obsession and moral decay. Each man defines the other's arc. Rick wouldn't become the leader he is without Shane, and Shane's descent wouldn't have mattered without Rick. They very much are two sides of a coin. The slow burning tense build up to their showdown is a huge reason as to why season 2 is my favourite season of any television show ever made, and I love how narratively rich it is. There are just so many great moments between these two characters, from Shane supporting Rick after Carl's gunshot, to them reminiscing in the woods about their previous lives, all the way to their fight at the school. But after all this tense build-up, we finally get a satisfying conclusion in their final showdown. Rick is ultimately forced to kill his best friend in self-defense, but even after Shane's death, his influence never leaves. Rick begins making the kind of decisions that Shane would have made, and he even admits that Shane got it earlier than he did. Shane's ghost haunts Rick, even years after his death, as we see him hallucinate Shane in Season 9. No other character dynamic shaped the tone and theme of the early seasons more than this one did. And I just think the character dynamic of these two not only forced the audience to answer some very tough questions about what they would do, but also made them choose a side. Shane and Rick's relationship will always be a work of art to me, from the genuinely amazing performances from both John Bernthal and Andrew Lincoln to the incredibly layered motives of what was unfolding. It was the perfect introduction into what the series would go on to become, and this is without a doubt my favourite character dynamic in the entire series. But again, like I said at the beginning of the video, I would love to hear what you all think down below in the comments. If you enjoyed today's video, please do like and subscribe, as it helps out the channel massively. And I would also like to say a huge thank you for all of your patience, as I've been away in Japan for over a month, but I'm home now and I can't wait to get back to consistently uploading. But once again, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.